Pac-12 podcast. We're talking Rachaad White and his NFL draft stock, and then we're recapping the WNBA draft and talking about where those Pac-12 players we were discussing in the previous episode actually landed and where we'll be looking to watch them play, hopefully, if they make the team this season.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Pac-12 podcast, where we give you everything you need to know about the Pac-12 conference. Okay. Thank you so much for making this your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. I'm your host, Cindy Robinson, former Pac-12 student athlete. And my co-host here is Spencer McLaughlin. He also hosts Locked On Ducks. You see he's rocking the Oregon gear today. I'm actually rocking the NCAA Women's Final Four gear today in honor of discussing.
Wait, let me see that again. I dig that layout. You know, they changed the designs of those sorts of sweatshirts and shirts over the years. I like that one.
Yes, I low-key should have worn my WNBA hoodie, but we'll save that for when the season starts. All good. We'll have plenty of time for that. But before we get into WNBA talk, let's jump into our NFL draftee of the day, and that is Rachaad White. I mentioned last episode that I wanted to start getting into these running backs. There's a bunch to talk about from the Pac-12 that'll be entering the NFL draft, and Rachaad White is one of those running backs. He played a huge role for the Sun Devils this season. Kind of a big blow for the Sun Devils when he didn't play in the bowl game. And yeah, he was just a big part of that offense. One thing that they've been discussing a lot, and I've been discussing with Richie, is how they'll actually be able to replace him on the team. They're hoping Daniel Nagata can be that person for them, but not quite sure. So for you, Spencer, and you saw a bunch of Rachaad White from watching him this season, but also playing against Oregon. What were your thoughts about him and going into the next level?
Well, I think Arizona State is the only school to have back-to-back running backs who wear the number 3. They had Eno Benjamin, and then they had Rachaad White. I don't know that I've seen that at any other school. If you're watching on YouTube and you can think of one, by all means, drop a comment below. But I think that I'm correct on that particular front. The interesting thing with Rachaad White is he's originally a junior college guy. So he started at the JUCO level, had a lot of success, and then he came to Arizona State and leaves a void at the running back position, to be sure. But typically, I talked about this on my show Locked On Ducks about Mitchell Agude, who was at UCLA, transferred down to Miami over Oregon, was in his final couple schools for his last year of eligibility. Typically with a junior college football player or someone who started their career as a junior college football player, you're going to get a certain level of intensity and grit and toughness on every single play, because when you play at the JUCO level, you don't have the flashy facilities and you don't have, all the attention you want. You have to work that much harder in order to earn your way up to the Division I level. And White certainly accomplished that feat after he played at the NJCAA level and then got his way up to a Power 5 school and had a really good career. His first year with the Sun Devils, actually, I don't know if you saw this, Cindy, he averaged 10 yards a carry. He only had 42, but he averaged 10 yards a carry. So he had that sort of explosiveness capability, but he doesn't do it in a typical fashion. That's why I was talking about the JUCO profile that you typically see from those sorts of guys that Agude from UCLA does demonstrate, where he's got a really high motor on every single play. And I wanted Oregon to go get him because pass rusher is going to be a big weakness for the Ducks this year if guys don't start to pop or step up in a huge way. And I think that Agude showed that. But the interesting thing with Rachaad White is he has the physical size to get drafted in the NFL. He's 6'2", 6'3", 210 pounds. I mean, he could almost play a receiver or tight end if he bulked up a little bit. He's that sort of back, but he doesn't run with the sort of toughness and grit and determination that I think he's capable of. He needs to find some way to get that sort of spark to where he's more of a punishing force downhill, because what he does really well is the way that he cuts between the tackles and gets around defenders to make guys miss. He can still get better at that, but when you watch him on tape, the best moments he showcases are sort of these little miniature jump cuts, not a Reggie Bush style jump cut or anything like that. Nobody is on that level. But the thing about him is he's really shifty. That's the word that pops off when you watch him play. He's very, very shifty, and he's also very patient, which is a perfectly valid and acceptable way to run. You can succeed doing that in the NFL, but I think for a guy of his size, he has to be able to run tougher. He has to be able to run in a more physical fashion to be able to carve out a consistent role in the NFL. He's projecting right now as sort of a mid to late round draft pick. I think just based on his size alone, I wouldn't expect he would have to be an undrafted free agent. I assume he will be able to get drafted by some team, but he doesn't project right now as number one running back, despite handling that workload at Arizona State. And I think it's because of the limitations that I talked about. He's also not particularly strong when it comes to pass protection. And I think that, sort of plays hand in hand with the running style I'm talking about. He's a little bit more patient, a little bit more decisive, and wants to, make guys miss rather than taking them head on and using his size. I think that's why, from a pass protection standpoint, he leaves a little bit to be desired. So
Yeah.
he's definitely an intriguing prospect and a guy I would take a shot on in the later rounds because I think his upside is there, but I don't think we've seen his best football, so to speak, at Arizona State, even though he was very productive there. He was a good running back in the backfield there with Jaden Daniels as a pretty mobile quarterback for the Sun Devils this past year. And I think that he's still is still climbing, and it's tough to ask a guy to do that at the NFL level. But if he can find a position coach who can get him to, you don't have to do it on every single carry, but more often, finish runs, kind of be a little bit more of a tone setting back when he comes into the game. I think he can be really effective in the NFL and carve out a secondary back role on an NFL team.
Yeah, as of right now, he has had virtual visits with Saints, Bills, Bengals, Ravens, and Raiders, and a few other teams. And then he has a actual in-person visit traveling to Tampa with the Buccaneers on Wednesday. And then I think he recently had a visit with the Browns. Can't really see him going to the Browns, or at least that being beneficial for him, with Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, D'Ernest Johnson, I think they said, and Demetric Felton from UCLA already likely on the roster. Might just be like, informal meetings. That happens. You meet with a lot of teams when you're going through this process.
Right.
A team like the Saints could very much use his help. Definitely could.
Yeah, I think of those teams, the Saints would be the best fit. The Ravens always have good running backs, and from a scheme perspective, every running back should want to go to the Ravens because they run it 60-65% of the time with Lamar Jackson and Greg Roman, their offensive coordinator. But I think from a roster perspective, the most opportunities would be available with the Saints. I'm with you 100% on the Browns. I do not like that spot.
Yeah.
He could not see the field at all if he goes there because of all the names that you just rattled off. And you're 100% right to do so, because that's not just a set lineup of running backs. That's an insanely talented group of running backs. I think Felton had more impressive college tape than Rachaad White, and he saw a few touches this past season for the Browns. I think if he were able to, establish himself as a number 3 running back, he could be really pretty good. He's capable of being a number 2, but he's just behind two
strong,
two all-league caliber players. Like Kareem Hunt is a backup, but he is RB1 caliber, and we all know how good Nick Chubb is. So I agree.
And I've had both of them on fantasy teams before.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. You could take both in fantasy too. So that's not the sort of situation that you want to go to if you're Rachaad White. I think the Saints would be an intriguing fit, even though they don't have Sean Payton anymore. I think that's a spot where it's just got the biggest void, And so for a guy who I think still has something to prove, as I was just talking about in terms of his potential and the way that he plays, I think the Saints would give him the best chance to do that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, coming up next, Spencer and I are going to dive into this WNBA draft. It was an eventful night and actually a few surprises for the Pac-12. I was pleasantly surprised, I would say. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. Find all of the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. Not to mention, WNBA is about to start. And then before you know it, football season will be here. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline is where the game starts. Okay, thank you so much for making this your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, so continue to make this your first listen. Spencer, I don't know if you tuned in last night. I had no choice. But the WNBA draft went off last night, and I will tell you this. Working in sports is a very hectic job, okay? But even more hectic when you're like helping lead the way in certain sports and plans and all of that. So I'm almost to the point of like, I don't know if I can do this anymore because it's killing my fandom. Because it's like I get so wrapped up in the work side of it all. But it was nice to see working my other job. It was nice to see that my Pac-12 side came through last night. 3 of the Pac-12 players we mentioned all got drafted first round. Actually went higher than we expected. At least 2 of them did. So I can't wait to talk about that. But let's start with the one we knew was probably going to land in that top 5 position, and that is Nyara Sabally. She went number 5 to the New York Liberty, and so much to break down there, talk about. First, let's start with the fact that she followed her sister's footsteps and going first round. Her sister went number 2 last season to the Dallas Wings. And now she's an all-star there for them. And now Nyara will be heading to New York to not only play in the WNBA, but also join her former teammate, Sabrina Ionescu, who went number 1 to New York. Really quick before I let Spencer dive in about this reconnection, because I know he can't wait to talk about that. New York needed a big, actually one of their star players, BetOnline Laney, was at the draft and spoke with Holly Rowe literally minutes before their draft pick and mentioned how she's hoping that they choose a big. That's something that they need. They needed that playmaker in the paint for both sides, but coming off the bench mainly because they did just sign veteran Stephanie Dolson from the WNBA championship team, Chicago Sky. She has experience, size, and obviously a proven winner. So right now it looks like Sabally will be coming off the bench behind her, but it'll be the much needed like relief that Dolson would need. Main concern about Sabally, and I think it's kind of clear and we all know this, is the injury front. She experienced a lot of injuries in college, and that is probably the one thing that's making people concerned about her ability to make this team. After Spencer talks, we'll talk a little bit about how tough it really is to make a WNBA team.
Yeah, so Sabally unfortunately was plagued by injuries a couple times, but her on-court production you can't question it. And every Duck fan watching or listening to this out there knows that when she was on the court, you knew it at both ends of the floor. Not just because this past season in particular, Oregon really ran her offense through her, and she's capable of being that sort of player, and she's got a good array of moves and nice touch. I think she can improve on her jump shot a little bit. That's one area where her game can certainly grow. But defensively, she is just a force to be reckoned with. And I think that that's a luxury for any coach at any level to be able to bring potentially off the bench, someone who can get you points in the paint, but will also defend. And, a lot of times backup bigs in the WNBA or NBA are, kind of one side or the other, right? Like you look at him, you say, okay, so this player can score really well. It doesn't really defend the paint super well, but it's okay. It's a backup role, and we just need some production at the offensive end, or vice versa at the defensive end. But Sabally can bring you both, and I think that is something she's more than capable of doing. And you just hope, as you really hope with all big players, you're just hoping that she's able to stay healthy. And unfortunately, she does have that history, and I think that, maybe held back her production a little bit at Oregon from a statistical standpoint, but she still was drafted in the first round for a reason. And it was an awesome day for Duck fans. There's a great video of Kelly Graves, their women's basketball coach, out there just going nuts when the Liberty announced that they were going to take Sabally, and then she's going to be back with Sabrina Ionescu as well, the GOAT for Oregon women's basketball, maybe just women's basketball in general at the college level. And that's just an awesome thing, because the great part about pro sports is that we have an affinity for all these players that we get at the college ranks, and then we get to watch them play professionally and root for them, a little bit more from afar, and Oregon fans are going to have a great chance to do that. That draft where Sabally and Ruthie Hubbard and Sabrina Ionescu all went in the first round, the team that was unfortunately deprived of what just might have been a national championship season, that will have to just forever remain another what if for Duck fans out there, but they don't have to wonder.
Thank you, COVID.
Yeah, that there are a lot of what ifs in Oregon sports.
Yeah.
What if Dyer is down? What if Oregon's receivers are healthy against Ohio State? What if Chris Boucher's knee doesn't give out before the NCAA tournament? Like there are several, but that is definitely one of them. What if that Sabrina-led team was able to play in the NCAA tournament? And they would have been a betting favorite for sure. But nevertheless, professionally, Sabally and Ionescu reunited is an awesome thing to see for Duck fans.
Yeah, it's exciting more so because Sabally mentioned it's been one thing to play in practice with Sabrina, right? But she's excited to actually be able to play in a game and be on the floor with her. Definitely expecting Sabrina to feed it to Sabally left and right. Hopefully it's just a quick chemistry connection. One thing, quick little notes and fun tidbits when it comes to the Pac-12. Sabally is, you mentioned, the fourth player in school history to be drafted first round in the WNBA behind the last three that went last season, but also the second player in program history to forego remaining eligibility to enter the WNBA draft early. And the player before her was her sister. So Sabally family making Oregon history and hopefully make some WNBA history. Excited to see what she does. Hopefully she stays injury-free because that is probably the biggest thing, right? New York Liberty definitely could use the help. They ended their season 12-20, but they were a very talented team, with the last team to make the playoffs, and they lost in the first round to the Phoenix Mercury, who ended up being the runner-up, but just by 1 point. So you can already tell how much adding Stephanie Dolson and now Sabally will make a difference in this team's regular season and possibly their playoff hopes. So
yeah, and I think the other thing that could be fortuitous, or at least we hope for Nyara Sabally, is that she might not have to play a full workload right away, right? We're talking about how she might be coming off the bench, and sure, she's a starting caliber player at the professional level, but I think that someone with an injury history being eased into that level of competition, I think could really help her out, and hopefully that lets her body adjust to the style of play and just the different the speed, the physicality, and like how all that changes from the college to the pro ranks. Hopefully she's able to slowly work her way into playing more minutes. And I don't know how long the Liberty plan to keep Dolson around on the roster, but in a couple of years, Sabally could certainly be the starting center, but not starting right away might not be the worst thing for her.
For sure. I 100% agree. All right, coming up next, we will continue to discuss the WNBA draft and the other two Pac-12 players who went in the first round. Thanks for making Locked On Pac-12 podcast your first listen every day. Now for a big announcement. Starting Thursday, April 28th, tune into Locked On NFL Draft's live coverage of the 2022 NFL Draft with all 3 days of real-time analysis from our extensive lineup of experts and insiders. And for those of you dying to know who your team will take, catch Odyssey and Locked On NFL Mock Draft special host by Brian Peacock and former scout Matt Williamson of the Peacock and Williamson NFL show all week leading up to the first pick. Where you can catch it, Locked On NFL Draft Live, Locked On NFL Draft YouTube page. That's where Locked On NFL Draft Live lives. And then the Odyssey NFL Mock Draft. That's on Odyssey and Locked On NFL Draft podcast feeds. Make sure you check it out April 28th. 7 p.m. Eastern Time, April 29th, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and April 30th, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time as far as Locked On NFL Draft Live goes. And then you'll definitely can check them at any time on the NFL Mock Draft Odyssey, on April 18th to the 22nd and 25th. Okay, so something I was mentioning before we went off for a break was how difficult it is to make a WNBA team. There are only 12 teams and 12 roster spots. And let alone seeing how many people went in the WNBA draft last night, all the people that actually entered the WNBA draft and didn't go drafted. I think it was over 100 that entered their names. And it's just, at this point, the WNBA and the players are calling for an expansion team. Expansion teams. And right now, the WNBA is just not on board with that. So I think it's something we'll see in the coming years. But right now, it's very difficult to make a team. And that's why we see so many players playing overseas. It's not always the safest situation, as we're seeing with what's going on with Brittany Griner. But yeah, that is the reality of what WNBA players are dealing with. And they just want to play the game that they love, that they've been playing, the same way the NBA players get to. So hopefully we'll see expansion teams happening soon, because it's great to celebrate being drafted, but if it's too difficult to make a team, even if you're going in the first round, it says a lot about what's going on right now in the league. So on to our next draft pick, and that is Lexie Hull. Okay, we were discussing Lexie yesterday. I do not think either one of us thought she would make it in the top 6 that she did.
No.
She heard her name called right after Nyara's. And here's my thing. I almost think she wasn't even sure if she was going to go first round, because she didn't even attend the WNBA draft. I don't want to speak for her and say that's why, but it kind of is like lining up like, maybe no one saw this coming and didn't think that she would need to be on stage. She probably was going to hear her name called, but not this soon. So yes, she went number 6 to, why am I blanking right now? Oh, Indiana Fever. Now, Indiana Fever had a bunch of draft picks in this draft. They had 5, I believe, in the first round, 4 or 5. Let me double check that right now. They had Nalissa Smith go at number 2, and then Emily Engstler from Louisville at number 4. Then they had Lexie Hull at 6, and then Queen Egbo at number 10. But overall, they left with 7 players, and I'm gonna let you know right now, all 7 of them are not making the team. Okay, but it's exciting. One thing that the GM, Lynn Dunn, says, she wanted energetic young players who could bring defense, okay? And that is one thing we both know that Lexie Hull is really great at. She actually led the Cardinals in steals this season with 78. And just the energy she has on the floor, that was one thing you boasted about her last episode, was that she's energetic, competitive, and she does not give up. Like, you're going to see her giving her all on both sides of the floor. So with this team, I will say this. They are a work in progress for sure, and you can tell with how many draft picks they had and how many players they're bringing in, it was necessary. But for you, what are you excited to see Lexie Hull in the next level?
The sort of role that she carves out. I mean, when a player is taken higher than you think, it just begs the question, what did the Indiana Fever see that general scouts or just, draft analysts did not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there was something there, and maybe is what we were talking about last episode, is just the way that she brings that competitive energy every single possession at both ends of the floor, whether she's shooting the ball well or not. And she's more than capable of scoring and shooting the ball well from distance. I think she was just under 40% this past season. So there was something there that they really liked. Maybe it was in a pre-draft interview. Maybe it was in a certain game. It's hard to know for sure. Those sorts of trade secrets, I don't think get leaked out to the public very often, but they'll stick with the general response of like, she's a talented player who works hard, just like all the standard stuff that you'd expect to see. But that one was definitely a surprise when you look at the top picks, and they clearly like something about her. And so I'm just fascinated to see if someone who I was thinking, maybe could be a starter, but perhaps not right away. If you take someone that high, typically you think she's going to compete for a starting spot. So I'm most interested to see what she's able to do on that team in terms of playing time and the sort of role that they're expecting her to take on.
I will say this pick caused a bit of a controversial situation last night, because they did end up drafting Destiny Henderson, who fell all the way to number 20 in the second round. Super shocking. Destiny was, the top point guard probably in this Final Four championship team, obviously, and she went off in that championship game. So everyone expected her draft stock to rise, and the Indiana Fever had an opportunity to get Destiny. I'm guessing they just really felt like Lexie was going to not be on the board and had to swoop her up before they, put in. They actually end up getting Destiny at a, I guess, cheaper price in this sense. But Destiny, I think, is someone we'll see for sure flourish on that team as well. Excited to see what the Indiana Fever do. I feel like they have so many picks now. I got to pay attention to how they use them this season.
Well, they had so many, as you mentioned. There's just a question mark at each of those slots, right? Every time you take a draft pick, everyone wants to know, okay, how much is he or she going to play? What sort of impact are they going to have? But when you have that many taken that high, it magnifies that question of, okay, what is this team about to look like? There's a chance, if they all pop and make the roster and become regular contributors, that the team is just wildly different than what they were from a season ago. And I think that's, a valid strategy by the GM, because if things are not going the way you want it to, sometimes you got to shake it up. And they clearly wanted to go in the youthful direction.
Yep, I agree. All right, and then our next player, last one on the list, was Maya Hollingshed. We talked about her yesterday. From Colorado, went number 8 to Las Vegas Aces. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this is probably the best place to go for any of the draftees. There's so much happening with the Las Vegas Aces. One being, their new coaching staff. Becky Hammond is the head coach. Natalie Williams is the general manager, and they replaced Bill Lambier and Dan Padover. They also lost veterans Liz Cambage and Angel McCutcheon in free agency. Super dramatic changes. Vegas Aces had the second best record in the league last year, and literally lost, in the WNBA semifinals. It was a heartbreaking game. I was actually cheering for them, but I'll say this: they are in a position to where they have not as many players on protected contracts. So there's so much more opportunities for the new draft class to come in and actually make this team and make a difference. The Aces actually traded for the number 8 pick and the number 13 pick with the Minnesota Lynx literally a day before the draft. So they traded up to get Maya. And the problem there, I won't say problem for us, because we're happy for our Pac-12 people, but the concern, I'll say, was, did they make the most out of their trades? Because I don't think she was the one who anybody anticipated them to go out of their way to go get, but for whatever reason, they saw fit to do so. I will say she's joining a veteran-heavy team, and she kind of fits in that mold, being a fifth-year senior, having that maturity. Now it's just building the experience at the next level.
Yeah, and anytime you trade up for a player, the fans of that particular team are right to think, okay, so the expectations are higher, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like think about it in an NFL sense. You trade up to get Jordan Love if you're the Packers. You trade up to get Trey Lance if you're the 49ers. Okay, the expectations are not higher because you gave something up, and that means that you were determined to get that specific player. You end up drafting that player. Expectations are going to be a little bit higher. So if it doesn't go the way that the front office thinks it will for Las Vegas, then I'm not going to go as far to say that it would be, a full-on fan revolt. But I think you would have some frustrations of well, if she's only playing like that, and I think that she can be a solid pro in the WNBA, but if she doesn't produce at a very, very high level, then the questions just start to arise from fans and media pundits all over the place. If this is a player who we traded up to draft here, but could have gotten back at this pick most likely, then why exactly did we do that? Jordan Love isn't actually very good for the Packers, and he doesn't actually play because they just have Aaron Rodgers. So why did they trade up? That's a very legitimate point to make. And if her production is not where the expectations are, at least for the franchise, then I think you'll start to see that sort of stuff. And it'll be understandable, because anytime you trade up, you give up draft capital to go higher in the draft and take a player. You have to be sure that is the right pick.
Yeah. Well, nonetheless, Pac-12 fans, we have a plethora of Pac-12 athletes in the WNBA, and you should be tuning in this season. I'm super excited. I feel like I would like to talk a little more WNBA this season. So if we have some good former Pac-12 players that go off, it's worth mentioning, worth talking about, possibly seeing if we can get on the show. Yeah. Thank you, Spencer, for another wonderful episode of Locked on Pac-12. I know, crazy talking all WNBA today. We had a little football in there, but it was all WNBA today. We're advocating for women's sports over here. You guys make sure you check out Locked on Ducks and Locked on Pac-12 podcast on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, and listen, wherever you get your podcast from. You can also follow along on Twitter at LO_Pac12 and at Locked on Ducks. And then Spencer's personal handle is at Smalls_55. And mine is at _Cindy Robinson. Other than that, make sure you all continue to stay locked on Pac-12 on the Locked On Network.